Right now I'd like to welcome Iain onto the stage, who is our hub crawl hero for Newcastle. This is a new initiative for Yuki this year. So the hub crawl hero is celebrating a studio within a region that's done really good work. And obviously for Newcastle there's quite a few. But Iain got back to us.
You know, sometimes you get an email and you're like, were we first choice? And now I know. Now it's like first to answer.
No, you were first choice. No, thank you so much. So I suppose the first question is, it's very standard. Why is the origin of Double 11?
Well, I'm slightly more nervous answering this question than I might have been, because Lee's actually here. So I feel like this is part of a test of, like, if I get this wrong, he'll correct me. Yeah. And I also think that the origin of the place more than 10 years later is not necessarily as exciting or as interesting as where we are now, because I think a lot of things have changed since then. But Lee, I think, and some of our early founder members had been in the games industry for a long time and had experienced the kind of the culture of, like, very intensive work, long periods of time, and felt like, I think that there had to be a better way of doing this, and wanted to start their own thing. And sort of there's a mix of, like, experiences you've had, a little bit of that kind of youthful exuberance of, like, it'll be easy when I do it, and then obviously you try and do it and you're like, oh no, it's really hard. There's as I've said a few times in the past, like, people are never as dumb as you think, and you're never as smart as you think. And I think that's the thing going into sort of starting a new venture. So the idea was to set up a place that Mark, our COO, sometimes describes as like a home for waifs and strays in the games industry. Like, if you'd been hurt before, you could go, come and hang out. And our origins were very technical, because you start with the things that you can do. So if your background is programming and solving really difficult problems, you get a reputation for sort of solving people's difficult problems. And so starting from an attic or around a coffee table or around a kitchen table, and we talked about this at the Yuki AGM last year. It was one of the topics when I was invited to talk about that. It's like, where do you start? And it's like, well, nobody sits down and goes, I'm going to found my video games company and I'm going to see what Western Supermare think about it. Like, you found it where you are. Like, you start where you can, and then you go from there. So the origins were quite technical, but we've definitely moved beyond that, and our story has expanded since then.
And sort of leading on from that, you know, you say, well, it might be more interesting to talk about now, but you know, how has the industry changed from 2010 to now? How would you see it?
Well, so it's interesting. I was looking back at, like, 2010 and sort of reminding myself of how things have changed and moved on. I mean, obviously the industry is infinitely better because Double 11's in it, so that's always good. But you think, like, back 2010, Steam is like 7 years old, is just shaking off the shackles of being a really terrible piece of desktop software when it started. Like, it had a terrible reputation when it began. People are buying discs and taking them in to trade them in. The iPhone's only a few years old. Android's only a few years old. Mobile gaming is clearly trending in a direction. It's nowhere near as big as it is now, and it's not what it is, not recognisable as it is now. There's very familiar names in 2010 in games. You've got games like Limbo and Bayonetta and Mass Effect and Red Dead, and, you know, all these things have kind of, you know, a lot of them have come back in recent years as remasters or sequels and things like that. So there's some very familiar names bubbling around. But I think when we started, that idea of kind of being a kinder, safer place to work was maybe less common. It was a bit more like, well, if you want to work in games, that's just what you've got to go through. And I think that's a big change, is that much more companies, you know, as we saw in the last presentation as well, like Tim's talking about, it's coming up in the sports interactive stuff that Grant was saying, you know, it's like, you know, Julia's here talking about well-being as a thing that a studio focuses on, or a group of studios focus on. So I think there's definitely a lot more empathy and kindness in general in the industry, which is for the better, and I think that continues. And I think you also find more people in the games industry now who have come from different backgrounds. So my start in games was 20 odd years ago. Late 90s, I was a journalist, so I wrote for things. I was freelance a lot, but I wrote for, like, GameSpot and PC Gamer and things like that. And then the .com bubble burst, and I got scared and got a proper job. And now whenever I talk to people at games events, I say, don't get scared and don't get a proper job, because it took me 20 years to kind of go around and come back to it. So, you know, I think we're trying to shake off that reputation of being a kind of a hard place to work as well.
What was your proper job, if you don't mind me asking?
So I went through tech and startups. I say proper job. I landed at an agency which became LBI, so one of the big digital agencies. And so we were doing websites and things like that. And I worked on healthcare stuff, and then startups. I worked at moo.com. I was employee number 9, I think, at moo.com, which was quite cool. Richard's now an OBE, I think, or something like that. So the founder's done crazy stuff. He promised me a Lamborghini in 3 years, and that didn't happen. But hope springs. Maybe it's just in the post. It might be the post. There's been some strikes. Who knows? But yeah, so I went through startups and tech, and then landed back here.
So what made you come back to games?
It's brilliant. Like I love. It's really ridiculous, but there's a really good book for anyone who's in the room, and a really great talk that's worth watching. A guy called Dave Evans. And the book is called Designing Your Life. He's subsequently done things called Designing Your Work Life. There's a talks at Google. You've spent enough time with me now to know why I love him when you watch the video, because he talks at 200 miles an hour and covers a lot of topics, and he's very excitable. And I like to talk quickly and get very excited about big ideas. And there was some stuff in that was a little practice that they encourage, where you draw out little squares. It's a good kind of well-being practice, actually. And you basically measure out of 4 blocks how you feel in terms of your, I think it's work, love, play, and health. And you just score yourself. And shortly after I joined Double 11 in 2019, I was looking back on some of these that I'd drawn like over years later, and I was doing all right. I was a projects director at a company, got the car, got to go to things like had a team of people making cool stuff. It was really exciting stuff. But I looked back on some of these ones that I'd drawn, and I'd coloured some in, and like work was quite low for one of the quarterly check-ins I'd done with myself, and I'd scribbled like games ? And I think it was bubbling away in the back of my mind that I'd done maybe a sensible thing at the time, but that I wasn't fulfilled. The plate was always full, but I didn't feel full, and so that's why I came back. It just, something was missing, and when you find something that you engage with that you love, your work becomes that much more rewarding and somehow not quite work. And so yeah, that's why I had to come back.
Brilliant. And sort of going back to Double 11 as a studio, and you've got 300 plus employees now across 2 studios. How do you create and maintain studio culture? Obviously we've had the conversation today, but how does Double 11 maintain a studio culture?
So it's very tricky. I think we've grown very rapidly, like the Sports Interactive presentation earlier on. Like we've had 200 plus people join through the course of the pandemic. I think we were just over 100 people at the beginning of the pandemic, and now we're 370-ish in 2 locations, as you say, and a few people dotted about around the world. And I think the culture there it's been a hard lesson to learn in terms of how do you convey this stuff, especially when you were hiring people in a country you couldn't visit for nearly 2 years. We couldn't get over to see people. We had members of the KL team say that their parents didn't believe it was a real job. Right? They'd interviewed at this games company. Who on earth is Double 11? Are these people in the UK? Sure. And then PCs start turning up at people's houses, and they're just like, okay. And they were spending all their time in a room doing stuff every day, and so conveying to them was much harder, because you're doing it through a postage stamp sized like a Teams window. But we've held on to a few things that we've done since forever. I think it's only recently, due to scale, that Lee has stopped doing some direct, like almost one-to-one in some cases, like founder meet the CEO conversations. And it was just like getting too big, so we're doing different things there. But we always make sure that there are, when you join, not interviews, but like presentations, from senior stakeholders. So often Mark, our COO, will do one, and we open with our values, right? Like our values are very pointedly humanity, integrity, and ambition, right? And that's really important, that humanity is the first one and that integrity is the second one, because we want to be a good place to work. We want you to, it's not working on games at any cost. It's working on this stuff because we'll treat you well while you're doing it. But ambition, because we want to grow. And I think the studio is a story of ambition, especially in the last few years. And so what we try and do with those opening presentations and calls is to sit people down and talk them through what we've done. We talk them through some of our history and the games that we've made and the stuff we've worked on. We tell them funny stories about how it arrived and how these things came about. And then we ask them to own our success. And I think that's a really key phrase that's always stuck with me since Mark said it to me. It's like, no job is too big and no job is too small. And if you see us not living up to that ideal, these standards that we're setting for ourselves, then talk to us about it and call us out on it. Because so often you hear that the industry's full of enough horror stories, thanks, and unfortunately more of those kind of bubble up over the years as people feel confident enough to step forward and talk about them. And what we want to do is if people see something, say something. We might not be hitting our mark, we might not be meeting those ideals, we might not be behaving in a way or you might have misunderstood something, but we want people to form good relationships, and we want them to hold us to account, and that means everyone's accessible, especially now, right? We've all got Teams or Slack or whatever it is that you use at work to communicate with one another. That means the CEO is a click away, right? That means that I'm a click away. That means stop me in the corridor and talk to me if you're frustrated, but also encouraging getting together and talking about stuff, and making sure that we talk often, and making sure that cultures, we introduced producers into the studio formally about 4.5 years ago. And that was a big change. Up until that point, we'd worked on stuff that was small enough that teams could kind of it was specific, hard work, technical work. People would tend to self-organize around things and stuff, and we realized that we needed that producer, that production layer in to manage stuff. And so we've tried to bring in policy and process and support where needed, but not in a way that kind of chokes the creativity and the life out of it, but in a very much supportive way. And it's funny when Grant was talking about we looked up what it was and it was a producer. We did that, but we did it with training and development. We wanted someone who was kind of in the business, thinking about people's development, thinking about their future, and it turned out it was L&D. And Sarah, who joined us, was like, yeah, that's my job. And we just didn't really know. And now we have a 15 strong, I think it is, people and culture team that's made up of talent, and Laura's our head of people and culture, and that's come in the last 2 years as well. So we're building the support mechanism that then helps us communicate regularly. I think that's the way we do it.
And sort of thinking about growth as well, with what you were just saying and everything. Is growth scary as well as being something that's exciting?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, you have partners. Because we work a lot with partners, so we work on Minecraft Dungeons with Mojang. We work on Fallout 76 with Bethesda. We work on some stuff that I'm terribly excited about. We can't say anything about yet, but it will hopefully be announced later on. And the people we work with quite often then contact us and go, cool, so about this. And you always want to say yes, because you're a lover of we're all here because we love the thing. Quite often we love the output, we love the product, we're consumers of the product, and we all enjoy it. So you always want to say yes, but it's definitely scary because you're like, well, if we say yes, how will we then do that? And so I think that's you've got to make that fun for teams as well, because otherwise there's this apprehension about something big comes in and then a bad thing happens, and then they start to associate the badness with the big thing, and it might not have been the big thing, it might have been all these other things. So we do a lot of retrospectives at the end of projects and things like that to try and unpick what happened, to talk about that, and then just get a bit better at kind of, right, it's okay to make mistakes, but let's try not to make the same mistake twice, that.
Yeah. And obviously Tim brought up about visions before, and one of yours was leaving a legacy as a new breed of games company that values its people and change the world of games for the better. So how do you do this? And say there's a studio that's inspired by you, what is it out of what you do in your visions now? What is it you'd like them to adopt into their own studio?
Yeah, sure. It's very Quantum Leap like that, for those in the room who remember it. But that idea of just leaving things better than you found them, I think is really, really important. And I don't think there's one way to do it, because it depends what you're doing. Whether it's training people up to go on to greater things elsewhere, whether it's providing just training support so that people can grow. I mean, Tom, one of our designers, came in. He was working in a video game store in Middlesbrough. He stuck his head around the door and he wanted to get into game development. We said, will you put desks together? Because that was a thing that was happening. It was all hands on deck at the time. He was like, sure. And that way we were like, great, we know. And now he's appearing in videos with Mojang, talking about stuff for Minecraft Dungeons, next to members of their design team, and just, contributing with all sorts of stuff. He contributed in a massive way to a company presentation today. It was brilliant. He's not a shy man. It's fantastic. He really throws himself into stuff. And I think it's things like that form this kind of notion of legacy. You can't measure legacy in 6 months. You can't measure legacy in a couple of years. It's when we're all, when I've got even more free highlights than I have now, and we all get together on someone's porch and we're sipping a drink, that's when we'll know whether we really did it. But it comes from, I think, sticking to your ideals and sticking to your guns and doing the things you set out to do. So if you set out to form your studio to produce certain types of work, or you want to make a certain thing, or there's a way you want to make a certain thing, like I only want to handcraft small mobile game experiences with a team of no more than 10, did you do it? I think that's how, it's about sitting down and thinking about what you want to make, right? Because you can do whatever you want to do. There's a thing I saw recently on social which I loved, which was a little Venn diagram of things I think I can do and things I'm actually allowed to do, and there's a really big difference, and it really often is just giving yourself the permission to do it or asking how. So I think that's how we approach it. We're constantly thinking about, is this the right thing, and reassessing, and I think that's how work gets done.
Mm-hmm. And what benefits and challenges do you have being based in the North East compared to other hubs or regions within the UK? What are the challenges and benefits of it?
I think, one of the challenges one benefit, is you get asked that question, which means you get up in front of people. So like in the space of 6 months, I've been involved in UK things, and that's come up a couple of times. It's really nice to get brought forward, because I think, not to be mean, but there's a little bit of a Kirsty and Phil effect on the North East in general, and being based in Middlesbrough, we don't always find it the easiest to attract people to the region, because Middlesbrough has a bad rap generally. But like for us, where we are, great transport links, the talent is there, the office space doesn't cost an arm and a leg, you've got good infrastructure, you've got good access to rail links to all over the country, multiple airports within spitting distance. You've got Leeds, you've got York, you've got Newcastle, all these places are right on your doorstep, which are a hotbed of talent, from either trained specifically in games from universities like Teesside, or trained in like adjacent skills around like video production, sound production, art, design, all that sort of stuff. All these skills are here, with the added bonus that I don't have to go down to London and compete with, 30 years ago, no one said, I'm going to turn Guildford into a hotbed for technology and software development. But I remember going down to Lionhead when they were working on Black and White, and there's this group of people doing an incredible thing and making a remarkable game that people still talk about. So I think these things spring up like retrospectively. When I was in tech and startups, we joked about Silicon Roundabout, and it was because the office space around near Old Street was cheap, right? And it was dusty and a bit crap, but you could get a decent internet connection put in, and so everyone was there, and that was just that became a thing. And funny thing, I was at a party when we coined the phrase Silicon Roundabout. It was a guy called Matt Biddulph came up with it, and then the next day the Guardian were on the phone to him about this thing, this phenomenon called Silicon Roundabout. So that's been 15 minutes. Like, we're talking about this phenomenon. But I think that's that the benefit for us is to be up here and to attract people, attract them with like a relatively good standard of living compared to cost. When I left London, 13 years ago, my rent for my tiny flat, which probably would have fitted into this front area here, went from £1,300 a month for a tiny one-bed flat to £400 a month for a house. And I live in God's waiting room, so granted, it's not where everyone wants to live, but it had a garage for my motorbike, so it was all right. And that was a massive improvement in quality of life for me, even though I was earning technically less money. I had much more money to sort of keep and save, and could also then think about starting a family and having a dog, and things that then help with all the well-being and stuff that we've talked about work-life balance. You can have a better work-life balance if you don't commute for 2 hours on a crowded train.
And what would you like to see sort of come into the region a little bit more?
I think we struggle. The north always gets left behind, right? I grew up in Stokesley, not far from Middlesbrough, and I think there is a sense of successive. There's always a scepticism around government investment and what actually comes to the region. I think everywhere has to fight for what they want to get these days. So I think we just have to kind of work together. Events like this are important. Established businesses getting together, pushing an agenda, using groups like Yuki to kind of be heard, and then pushing for what we can get, and then making the best use of what we can get. So if we've got tools like the stuff that Proto have got over the river, let's use it. Let's showcase it and show what it can do, and show that you don't have to just go and go on massive trips. Either at the very least, getting people moved around. The minute you're losing a day to travel, you're stuffed. So much better if you can do it as an hour away from the studio and come back if you're trying stuff out, even if it's prep for doing something elsewhere. So I think it's really about us all talking to one another and having groups like this and having get-togethers and sharing what we know and going, you need to talk to that person there, and because it is a bit of a hustle, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know one of the things that's come up, at least on like the Yuki side, is talk to your MP, let your MP know that you're there, because a lot of the time they've got no idea that there's a game studio there, or
Sure.
the whole cluster of them.
I would say though that is the challenge. So like my MP unfortunately is Rishi Sunak, and he's a bit busy these days. I think so. Like, but in my previous business, he did come to visit before he got the big job, and you did get that, you know. And it was William Hague before that, and we'd used connections to him. You do kind of get to move the needle a little bit. You know, the surgery time does exist, but yeah, depending on who your person is, if you can get hold of them, yeah.
Yep. And finally, what's next for Double 11? What's coming next?
So much for Double 11. We opened the KL studio last May, so that's coming up on a year, and that's the best space we've ever made. Like, it's an incredible studio space. It's great. So this year is more about investment in the UK. So we're doing some stuff on the UK side. We want to kind of talk more both like to people in the business and externally. That's why Florence is here, because she's just joined us as our PR and comms manager. So that's going to be something we're going to try and talk more and be a part more of things like this. We'll do more outreach. We have an intern program, placement program, that runs every year. They'll continue. That's paid placements in the studio, which we think is really important, and quite often results in people coming in and then they stay, which is really good. So there's more of that this year. I think we've got a bunch of projects that are kind of shipping stroke coming to an end, so there'll be some new stuff that gets announced, but yeah, it's going to be massive. I mean, all our partners want more. So I think the key thing for us is that there's more for us to do. So, you know, if you've enjoyed Minecraft Dungeons and Fallout 76, probably be more of those things, and Rust, you know, there's more of that coming. Beware with Rust, it can give you trust issues. We should probably support people in, you know, who play that game. There's a couple of sniggers from the back of people like Rust has hurt people in this room. I
heard a couple of
whispers
in.
Yeah. Get the dark camo pack and we'll have a chat at the end. But yeah, there's just more of that kind of growth and trying to maintain things. Last year we paid people extra to combat the cost of living stuff. So we gave people a pay increase, and we made sure it was an increase, not a percentage. So it was an amount of money. So I think it was £2,500 and then £1,500 again, and that sort of thing is quite important. So I think we're going to keep quite a close eye on how things are going globally and try and support the teams. And we factor in KL and we factor in the UK and that sort of stuff as well. So trying to support the whole team in the right way, I think, is also going to be, because this year might be a bit sketchy in a number of ways. So just trying to make sure that people aren't worried about the work, about their jobs, and worried about how they're going to heat their home and how they're going to eat, and they can just, you know, focus on doing the great thing that we want them to help make, you know. And I think that's really important.
Brilliant. And has anybody got any questions for Iain? Yeah.
I've got one, Iain. I think I saw, talking about the times that you've been at UK before, there's a phrase that you used that I pitched, which was you referenced, you know, here in the Northeast, and the Northeast has a lot of leg room to grow, a lot of opportunity that's available.
Yeah.
I guess, you know, and you mentioned a little bit about the opportunity and maybe more events like this happening in the Northeast and us being more vocal about what's there. I guess it was just to understand, for all of us, what can we do, or what challenges is there in the Northeast that we can help kind of alleviate and start to champion a little bit more about the industry, if that's okay. Because today, it's really, considering there's a train strike, it's fantastic how many people are here.
Yeah.
And something we absolutely need Yuki Helen to continue to keep doing in the region. Absolutely. But it was just to get from your point, what can we do?
Yeah, so what can we do? I mean, first of all, to say for people watching this on video later, there's 500 people here, you can't even see them. It's a massive turnout, they're all here for Helen. But I think we could, short of moving all our studios to the Northeast, because there is plenty of leg room and there's plenty of space, I think helping people starting up, you know, so if we're at university events, if we're at events like Gamebridge that have got a lot of students and people who are starting out early in their careers, people who are a bit older, maybe are established in a region, can say, oh, where are you thinking about setting up? That can be a question we ask people, like, have you thought about this? Whether it's co-working spaces, whether it's office space, whether it's just a few of you working fully remotely, which was a trend I think we saw with a lot of smaller studios when the pandemic hit. They were like, I need to pay for this space. We're a 5-person team, we can just, you know, work from home and talk to each other and have open Zoom channels and stuff. So I think there's a lot to do with, like, I talked about this week with some members of the People and Culture team, that like the next big studio that gets started could be started by someone in our studio. Like someone who's just, Bob, who's just walked by, like could just be the person who starts the next Coat Sink or the next whatever, or the next Double 11. Like we don't know where they are. So reminding them that they don't have to go away. And so creating space and hooking them up with one another. That's why I think things like Gamebridge and things like this are really important. And I think just the more shouting about that we can do. The slightly mad spaceman might ruin Twitter, which means we might lose the one really useful central place for like game people coming together. And as much as I love Mastodon, it's not the same thing. So I think we have to find ways to like physically get together, hang out and talk to one another to create those networks. Gamebridge, they have this thing where they say networking is working. And I think it's really important that like people get together and hang out and go, and then you might not need to talk to each other or think of a reason to catch up again for ages. But if you just meet someone at something like this and then you go, I could talk to them about that. Maybe, you know, it doesn't have to be full on mentorship. It's a person you can talk to. I think that those connections, because especially if you're starting on your own, that it can be quite lonely. Like I tried to leave university and start a business straight out of university doing web stuff, right? I was 22 and I had a Scottish literature degree. I was not prepared to run a business. I had no idea. And thankfully, I ran that badly for about a year and then got a proper job and went, you know, did some stuff. But it's finding those people to support you and to help you with the questions you don't even know to ask. So I think meeting people in person, and that's the thing we lost the last few years. I think that's so critical.